Hello and welcome to this one-week course for LSAT India in which we will be studying analytical reasoning, logical reasoning as well as reading comprehension. In today's lesson, we will be seeing the first lesson for reading comprehension, which is RC1. Dear students, this is the introductory lesson for reading comprehension. In this video, I won't be solving a question as such for you. Of course, we'll be looking at a few questions, but I won't solve them for you. But still, this is the most important lesson of all of the lessons in the series for reading comprehension. In this video, I will talk about what the purpose of the reading comprehension section is and therefore how you should approach the question, right? I will talk about some strategies that you can use to solve the reading comprehension questions. I will also discuss some of the mistakes that are commonly made by students. And in reading comprehension, there are several ways in which you can approach the question. There are several methods that you can use in order to arrive at the right answer. And after discussing a few of these, you should know how to eventually find the method that works for you. Because I cannot give you a method which is a one-size-fits-all. I can give you some ideas and then I can tell you as to how to find out the method that best works for you. So this video is very important. It is in fact the most important video for reading comprehension. If you watch this video carefully and you learn what I'm saying here, you have learned most of reading comprehension. Thereafter, when I solve questions for you in the other videos, you will find those very simple. So even if you find this a little theoretical, if you find this a little boring, a little difficult, don't stop. Make sure you watch the whole video. This will help you a lot. Now let's go ahead. So when I talk about reading comprehension to my students, some of them often come up to me and say that, sir, actually, I don't have the habit of reading. And since I don't have a reading habit, reading comprehension is very difficult for me. There are also people who say that you should read the newspaper every day and you do this, you read some articles and then you get the habit of reading. Yes, it is important that you should read because with a lot of reading comes some skills such as speed. You also learn some amount of vocabulary through reading. But the reading habit is not tested in reading comprehension. The habit of reading is a good habit. Of course, I'm not telling you not to develop that habit, but that habit is not essential for solving reading comprehension. In my assessment, if you learn the strategy for solving reading comprehension, you can make a big difference in 7 days, right? But you can't become very scholarly, you can't become well read in 7 days. But you can become good at solving reading comprehension questions in 7 days. I hope you understand the difference. There's a difference between being well read, okay? A well read person is somebody who has the habit of studying. I would not say that you can become well read in 7 days. But in a period of 7 days, you surely can become a person who can do well in the reading comprehension. So that's the first thing you should remember. The second thing is that reading comprehension is not a test of your proficiency in English. In fact, you'd often find that several people whose English may not be so fluent, who may not be very fluent speakers of the language, who may not be so proficient, who may not have a great vocabulary, still do very well in the exam. Because this is not a test of high-level vocabulary. It only tests very basic vocabulary. And even if there is a word that appears to be hard, it's always possible to make an intelligent guess about the meaning, okay? So even if you do find a hard looking word in the passage, it is always possible for you to make an intelligent guess and find out. So again, what I'd like to say is that it is not a test of English proficiency. It is not a test of vocabulary. It's only a test of basic vocabulary. Now, what do I mean by testing basic vocabulary? It means that you should be able to understand the exact meaning of words. Now, there are some words that we use very casually. For example, some of us may use words like some, all, none very casually, but if you realize they have a very precise meaning. So when you're reading comprehension, when you're reading for reading comprehension, when you're solving these questions, make sure you pay attention. So this is a game not of great vocabulary, but a test of being able to see the precise meaning of words. Can you really understand as to what the word exactly means? So it's not knowledge, it's a state of mind. How alert are you? How committed are you? How disciplined are you? Are you disciplined enough to stick to the task? Are you disciplined enough to recognize the true meaning of the word? Okay, so that's one kind of meaning. The second kind of meaning that you should know is the contextual meaning of the word. Now let us say there is this word called date. Okay, now this word date could mean several things. This is something that you could go out with someone on a certain date. Alright, so that would be a date when you date someone. The other thing is this fruit that's called the date, and then you also have the date as in like today is the 10th of June, for example, or 10th of July, for example. So these are the dates. So date can have three meanings. In the passage, it would have been used in one of these three. So the ability to understand the meaning in the context is the other skill that you need. This does not require you to have a great vocabulary. It requires you to have the skill to understand the context. Alright? And then you need this skill which is called understanding the reading structure. I will talk about this in a little more detail in a bit. I will get back to this reading structure, but I need you to understand that the most important thing about reading comprehension is not any skill apart from the fact that you need to have the ability to understand reading structure. I'll talk about it in a bit. For the sake of today's exercise, I will just look at this set of questions from section 4, which is reading comprehension, from the LSAT-India Prep Test 1. I will be solving this question set for you in the next video. I won't be solving this today, but I want you to have a look so that you can get the approach that I want to give you, right? So what you see here is a screenshot that I have taken from the Prep Test 1. The official Prep Test 1, you'd find that on the LSAT India website, discoverlaw.in, right? So what you see here is that from here up till here, this is a passage, and the passage has 55 such lines. And on the basis of this passage, just this one passage, you have the questions from question number 15 to question number 22, which is a total of 8 questions, right? It's a lot of questions on the basis of just this text, right? You do not need any knowledge apart from what is given in here. This alone is enough for you to solve 8 questions. So if you learn the trick of solving these questions, this reading comprehension section is actually a boon. You do not need any knowledge. You just need to learn how to understand how to read this, and on the basis of these 55 lines, you can answer 8 questions. So on this page, you can see that there are question number 15 and question number 16. I'll move to the next page. And here you can see that the remaining questions 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and 22. Alright. So you have these 8 questions that are based on one passage. Now let us say you're starting off. So you've got this question before you in the exam. So you start off by reading this passage. So when you need to read the passage, obviously you zoom in. So let us zoom in. Alright, so now we've zoomed in and we'll start reading it. So I start off by saying that, okay, the World Wide Web, a network of electronically produced and interconnected or linked sites called pages that are accessible via personal computer, raises legal issues about rights of owners of intellectual property, notably those who have created documents for inclusion on web pages. So as you can see, this is one sentence. It is 7 lines, but it is one sentence. And evidently I couldn't make too much sense of it. So what do? I decided, oh my god, I didn't understand, and I go back and read it again. So again I go, the World Wide Web, a network of electronically produced and interconnected sites. Oh, this isn't making sense to me. I think this is a problem that many of you must be facing when you start a reading comprehension question. So you go ahead, you zoom in and you try to make sense of the entire passage. It doesn't make sense, you do it again, and then you start looking at the questions. So then what you do is, let us say you saw this word intellectual property here. Now you go to the questions and you try to see, okay, do I find this word here? Do I find the same word here? If I find the same word at both places, let us say I found this word here and I found this word here, let me go ahead and mark the answer. That is not how you approach it. There are a couple of more things that I'd like to tell you before I go a little further. As you can see, it talks about copyright infringement, it talks about intellectual property. Oh my god. So once you see all of these things, you are now scared. And now you are so immersed in this little paragraph that you have forgotten that the question was actually very large. Let us remind ourselves the size of this problem. This is the size of the problem, alright? What we were stuck in was this little part. It is important for you to remember that this little paragraph here, or this first few lines that we were seeing, which we could not understand, are a very small part of this entire passage. You see, this is what we were seeing in the previous slide, just this little bit at the top, alright? So it's very important for us to understand this context. We must remember that this is a small part of a large passage. I'll tell you a couple of techniques about how not to get stuck inside one part, right? Otherwise, the problem is that we start attempting these reading comprehension questions. We begin, and then as soon as we start, if the first line is difficult, that's why I've picked up this passage. The first line is quite difficult, I should say. It is quite threatening also, and perhaps you might not be very confident. But there are ways to solve it. In this video, I will not solve this question. That I will solve in RC2. But I'll give you some approaches, and if you listen to the approaches, perhaps you won't even need me to explain this to you in RC2. Okay, I'll talk about a few things now. There's a lot that we can learn from some of the techniques used in filmmaking, alright, for reading comprehension. There are a couple of shots that can be taken, alright, in filmmaking. The first is what is known as the extra long shot, which means that let us say this is the subject, okay? Now the camera can be placed at a great distance from it. Now when the distance between the camera and the subject is a lot, it means that you can see the entire background, you can see the whole context. So that is what is the extra long shot. In this, you can see the entire landscape, you can see all of the background, but you can't see things in detail. So then you can zoom in. Once you zoom in a little bit, it is called a long shot. Here you can perhaps see a bit of the subject. You can also see some of the background, but then you have zoomed in a bit. As I zoom in further, it's called the medium shot. And finally, when I zoom in completely, and then you can see the details of a person, like you can see the specs, you can see the teeth, you can see the makeup, and all of these things, this is a close shot. Now, all of these things have a very important role in building a story and for the viewer to understand and comprehend. Remember that reading comprehension is about being able to understand what is being said. To illustrate this to you, I will look at the trailer of this movie that is called Padmavat. Many of you may have seen the movie. We'll have a look at the trailer of Padmavat, and I'll talk about how these shots have been used in the movie, in the trailer of the movie. So here we are. Let's have a look at the trailer of the Padmavat movie. Alright. So what you can see here is that this is the extra long shot. Okay. I've paused the video here to show you that this is a very long shot. It shows you that we are on a cliff. It gives you some of the context. Alright. Now we'll move a little more ahead and play the video and see what we see next. Here you can see that the camera has zoomed in a bit. It is still at a distance, but it has zoomed in. So you can see a little more detail than you could previously. Now if we look further into the video, we go ahead and I play this. And now you could see that this is Shahid Kapoor here. And you can see him from the back. You can't see him very clearly, but you can see that he's one of the men. And so you've got an idea of where he is. Now the camera zooms into this castle or this fort. Now when you look at this fort here, it looks like this fort is on top of the cliff, but that is generally not the case. Okay, it is very likely that this is a fort that is basically a set in Mumbai, but then because of the context, it looks like this fort is actually in on top of the cliff. Now you have been shown a context, and then this image shows you a certain kind of story. Now if I am to play this and go ahead further, now you have got the close shot. In this close shot, you can see Deepika, you can see her ornaments, you can see Shahid, you can see what he's worn, and this is how the technique of long shots and close shots is used to communicate a story. Alright, so it's important for us to be able to zoom out, for us to be able to understand the details. If you had not seen the shot where the long shot was taken, you would have not been able to realize, you would not have been able to fathom the fact that this shot in the story is taken on top of that cliff, right? So now with regard to reading comprehension, let's see if we can address some problems. Are we supposed to go back and forth, Are we supposed to zoom in and zoom out of the passage again and again? How many times should I read something? Let us say I read the first line. Like we saw, the passage has a long first line. I read it once, I could not understand. How many times am I to reread it? And at what point should I feel satisfied? Am I ever going to know something completely? So how many times do I read and reread? Also, another question that people often ask is, should I read the question first and then go to the passage? Or should we stick to the pattern of reading the passage first and then going to the question? I will address these questions in a bit, but I need to discuss some more concepts before that. So, we are here for reading comprehension. Let's be very clear. We are not here to learn the English language. We are not here to be masters of reading. We are not here because we want to develop the habit of reading. We are here simply to comprehend a passage and answer some questions on the basis of that passage. So that we are very clear. Now the point is, what is the meaning of comprehension? Because that's what we want to do. What is comprehension? And when do I know? When can I be satisfied that yes, I have comprehended the passage enough for me to go ahead and now solve the questions? For this, I have given you some indicators, some pointers that you should know, to feel satisfied that yes, you have comprehended it. The first point is that you should be able to predict and anticipate what is going to happen in the passage. Let me give you an example. Let us say I say that in the previous summer vacation, I went to Shimla for a week-long holiday. It was very nice. I had a lot of fun, and I also visited numerous places. And on the last day, and I stopped here. Now, if you have been able to understand what I was saying, if you have been able to comprehend what I was saying, then you would have had a certain expectation of what I will say next. Perhaps you thought I will talk about my next day, right? So you had a sense of anticipation. That means you could understand. Now, your anticipation may be right or it may be wrong. Maybe I was going to say that on the last day I found another friend and we had so much fun, and so I extended my trip by another 4 days. Wow. Or maybe what I was going to say was that on the last day, unfortunately I could not find my luggage and my money was stolen, this and that. So you might not know as to what I was going to say, but then you at least understood enough for you to be able to predict or anticipate what I was going to say next. So this is one of the most important indicators of having comprehended. Suppose you do not have any expectation. Suppose you don't know what to expect next. That means you have not comprehended it. If you have not done that, I would suggest go ahead and read it again. There is no hurry in the exam. You don't need to get all the questions right. Okay? You must remember that your LSAT India tests you on the basis of percentile. Okay? Remember, there's a big difference between 90% and 90 percentile. Your 90 percentile score would be something close to a marks of 50%, right, in terms of marks, or even less than that. Remember that you are here for an examination that tests you on percentile and not percentage. All right? So you don't need to get all the questions right. You don't need to be very fast. Of course, it's a desirable quality to be quick. You should practice that. But then, if you have to read anything again, in order to be able to understand it, make sure you invest that time. It is not a waste of time. Read until you can comprehend and be able to predict. If you're able to do it in the first attempt, if you think that you have a bit of an idea, then do not reread. You need not reread until you've understood everything. This is the first indicator. The second indicator is that when you've read it, and then you have an idea of what this scheme of the passage was, that when you kind of know that, okay, this was the passage that I had, here he said something this, then it was written here, then this was here, and finally he said this. Suppose you've been able to get a rough idea of the scheme, then again I would believe that you have succeeded in comprehending it. You are not expected to memorize the passage, you are not expected to understand every word of the passage. So if you've managed to get an awareness of the scheme, then again I'd say that okay, you've been able to comprehend. Next, after you have read the passage, are you in a position, or while you're reading the passage, are you able to kind of guess as to what the questions would be? When you can guess the questions, it means you have been able to understand the mind of the person who's framed the question. So to be able to see that kind of detail again means that you have comprehended it. These are skills that you will develop through practice, right? But you should be aware of these. If the mind is not aware of these possibilities, you will never do it. So make sure that as you practice, you should learn how to be able to guess the questions. There is one more step I would say. You should not only be able to guess the questions, but also perhaps be able to guess the options. Like what would be the question and what would be the options, and what would be the wrong options, and what is the option they're going to give me which they think I will fall for. So we always give attractive wrong options, right? So you need to speak of and you need to think of what perhaps is the kind of bait they will be giving you. What is the wrong option? What would be the right answer? So when you can think of all of these things, it means you have been able to comprehend. Suppose you are failing to do this, then I would advise you to go ahead and read again. Very simple. So we kind of know what comprehension is. Everybody comprehends at a different speed. It is not a problem if you are slow. There is enough time in the examination. And anyway, some things cannot be made faster. You can't expedite things, okay? You work at your speed, work at your optimal speed. If you can manage to get 8 out of 8 right, let's say you have this passage here, take your time. If you can manage to get 8 out of 8 right, that's a good achievement. That's a great achievement actually. Alright, do it at your own speed. So I had spoken earlier that I would be discussing reading structure with you. This is a very important concept. It's a very important foundation that you should have in order to be able to solve these questions effectively. So when you understand structure, what that means is in your head you've been able to make a template. Now what is the advantage of understanding a structure? What that means is that what you learned from one passage can now be used to solve the next passage. So you need to be able to look at a pattern, to be able to look at a structure, and then use that knowledge for future questions. Let us talk about what a typical problem in the LSAT India looks like. Generally, you will have a two-sided argument, which means that let us say you have your passage here like this, okay? Here you have your passage. It will give you a two-sided argument, okay? So it will start off with something that talks about a problem, like we saw that it was kind of talking about the World Wide Web. There was something about intellectual property or whatever. Okay, let's just think of it like this. Then we go ahead and have another paragraph, perhaps, which may talk about the first side of the story. Then we go ahead and we have another few lines. Perhaps they may talk about the second part of the story. Maybe these two are mixed. So you might have the first line here which talks about this one. The second line may talk about this one. The third line may again talk here and so on. But you get the idea. There are these 2 points that are discussed. Both sides of the coin are discussed. And then finally, you'd find somewhere perhaps at the end or perhaps even in between that there is the author's opinion. Now, how do you come to know what the author's opinion is? Suppose he says that rightfully or rightly. Suppose he says this, they have rightly said this. It means in his head, he thinks that something is right and something is wrong. So that's his opinion. Now, this person's opinion may either be with this person, or it may be with the second person, or it could be something else. So this is the general template that is followed. Now, even if this is not the template that is followed in your question, it is good to know that at least you have made a guess. So when you approach the question, you are expecting this template of one argument, another argument, author's opinion. Maybe the question that is there before you does not follow this structure, but still it's a good starting point. I always say that a wrong idea to start off with for reading comprehension, not for other things. For reading comprehension, if you have a certain anticipation, if you have a certain expectation, and if that expectation also is not met, let us say you anticipated A and you get B, even that is a success. The problem is if you have no anticipation. So what I've given you here is that you can, since most of the questions are of this structure, you can expect this to be so. But apart from that, sometimes you might have an argument or a passage that has perhaps only, let's say, one side and the author's opinion. Or maybe it might have 3 sides and the author's opinion. So you needn't bother about that. You can just see as to what you should do, but I gave you an idea of the general structure that is followed, and you should have this structure irrespective of what happens. So let us say when you get your passage, you should first be able to identify the structure. So let us say you've got your passage. Suppose you see the first side of the argument, the second side of the argument, and the third side. Now you know that the question is going to be based on these. I will explain these things to you when we do the question in the next video, but I'd like you to look at the question yourself first, try solving it, and only then look at my video. And then you might find an author's opinion here or whatever. Once you've understood the structure, you're in a much better position to solve the question. I'll talk about some more things now. Now we talk about how we should read the passage. Okay, so my advice would be that you should go one paragraph at a time. So let us say this is our passage here. This is the first paragraph, this is the second paragraph, and then here you can see the third paragraph. You might remember that in the beginning of the video, we attempted to read the first sentence. We read this part here in the beginning, right? And as you might appreciate, it was quite a difficult first sentence to understand. Even I, when I was reading this thing initially, could not make complete sense of it. But the thing is that you are not required to make complete sense of it. You are not here to master this passage. You are only here to be able to answer the questions based upon it. Okay. Now let us say I read it and I don't know whether I made sense of it or not. What should I do? Should I go back and read the sentence again? I'd say go ahead and finish the entire paragraph first. So make sure that you at least go until the end of this paragraph. Let's say you've reached until this point. Now, once you have done this much, at this point it is a point where you can pause. Now you can pause and then see, are you able to summarize it? Are you able to at least think of one point about it? Like, can you think of at least 1 or 2 points about it? 1 point or even 2 points? Can you think about some points which can summarize this paragraph for you so that you know you've understood something? Let us say you are able to think of a couple of points which can summarize this paragraph for you in your head. In that case, I would say go to the next passage. You can move on to the next passage. But let us say you read this whole paragraph, and if you were to ask yourself whether you understood anything and you don't have anything that you understood, in that case it is important for you to read it again. Right? Now there are some people who might be able to understand this in the first attempt. Some people may take 2 attempts, some people may take 3. So that's everybody's individual speed. That does not matter. If I must confess about myself, generally I do not make sense of a passage in the first attempt. It takes me around 2 readings or sometimes even 3 before I can make sense of the passage and go ahead and solve the questions. Like I said, time is important, but then what is more important than being fast is to be accurate, right? So if you give it time and if you are able to infer the meaning from this, if you are able to understand at least the summary of this, you are likely to get all the questions right. So I was talking to you about how you should identify how many times to read. This is your answer. Let us say you're able to summarize it. Good, move ahead. If you're not able to do that, do it again and practice this. Suppose you feel you're taking too long, then practice it until you get the skill. And with practice, you will get speed. It's very simple. And if you would do around 10 passages over the next few days, I'm sure you'd be able to do very well in the exam. All right? Just make sure that you practice. Practice will bring speed. But you cannot bypass the process, right? If you don't practice, if you don't follow this mechanism, you will never learn. So as far as speed is concerned, speed will come with practice, but you must follow this procedure. All right, let me go ahead now. Once you've learned how to read the problem, now the next thing is how to read the question. I've just taken a single question out of that passage here. I'm not going to solve the question for you, of course, but how do you go about reading it? The first thing you should do is to read the question stem. This is what you'd call the question stem. Okay, this part which talks of what the requirement of the question is without the options, this is the question stem. So let us say you read this question stem first. After reading the stem, you have to wait for a moment. before you go ahead and actually start reading these options, you need to pause for a moment and think whether you're able to predict the options. You see, if you've really been able to comprehend the question stem, let us say you've been able to comprehend this, right? If you have really been able to comprehend this, then you kind of know as to what the options are likely to be. You may get your prediction wrong, but still you should predict them. Now, once you have the prediction in your head, then go ahead and start reading each option and see if it kind of conforms to what you had thought in your head. So let's say you had predicted this. Now you get an option which says this, or it may say this. So just start seeing as to how it tallies with what you had in your head. Okay? And while you're reading the options, stay very alert to be able to eliminate the most absurd looking options. Let us say, for example, let us say you read this option and you feel that, oh, this is a bad option, I don't need to, this is something that I can immediately eliminate because it's either very extreme or very vague. I will talk about all of these things in the next video, don't worry about that. But then it's always possible for you to identify at least one very bad option. So when you're reading it, eliminate that bad option. The other thing you should see is that there might be some options that might require you to go back to the passage, right? Because it may contain some details. So now when you read the options, you have been able to again think of the entire long picture, the long shot, as I say. In that question, you've managed to now see what you must do. Otherwise, if you simply read the whole thing, you won't get an idea of what is happening. You must never read without being able to predict and without being able to understand. As long as you can understand, as long as you can predict, you can rest assured that you are being able to comprehend. Now that we've understood how to read the passage and how to read the questions, I'll move ahead to our last and perhaps the most important question and the most common question that I'm asked by students. So that question is, what do I read first? Do I first read the passage and then go on to the questions, or do I read the questions and then look at the passage? Now the answer to this is, well, I'd say it depends. Okay, it depends on what you find comfortable. So I'd say first thing is what you find comfortable, because after all, at the end of it, you're going to do that. I've given you some guidelines, but then as far as this question is concerned, I'd say do what you feel works for you. But still I have some suggestions for you. What I'd say is that, let us say if there is a passage that is long, let us say you have a long passage, a very long passage, and the passage also looks complex. Okay, it's a tough looking passage that has many technical details and it's very long. And let us say the questions in it, okay, the questions look simple and short. Let us say, which typically means that, let us say your RC paper, your reading comprehension looks like this, that you have a long passage, but your questions are very simple. There's like one line here followed by 4 small options. Next one here, 4 small options. In that case, I'd say read the questions first. You see, because the questions are simple and short, it won't take you long to read the questions. Let's say in 1 minute, you can read all the 8 questions. Okay. Now, once you read the 8 questions in 1 minute, you'd be able to see as to what is important in this long passage. Okay. So in that case, I'd say if it's a long passage and simple short questions, I'd say read the questions first. So in this case, I'd say read the questions first. But if it were the opposite, let us say your passage is short and your passage is simple. Okay, let's say you have a short passage and your passage is simple, and your questions, whether they are simple or complex, it doesn't matter. Your questions may be simple or they may be complex. Either way, start with the passage. So unless your passage is exceptionally difficult, do not start with the questions. If you've got a simple passage, start with the passage. And like I said, what is most important is not what you start off with, what you finish with. The most important thing for reading comprehension, like I said, is comprehension. Therefore, as an answer to this one question that you've asked me, the most common question, my answer is simply this. Make sure that what you do makes sense to you. You are the best judge of what you're doing, and therefore reading comprehension is about how you are able to comprehend it in your head. So this was some advice that I wanted to give you on solving reading comprehension questions. If you have any more questions, you can ask me in the comment section and I'd be happy to help you with those. But I think this is quite comprehensive. If you can apply the principles that were discussed in this video, I think you should be able to progress very quickly when you start attempting reading comprehension questions. I wish you all the best.